Hey, come on in. So Mireya is from upstairs. Andrew is remote as well.
Great.
We're not sure if everybody's going to show up or not, virtually or in person due to this weather.
Sure.
So
that's what I kind of heard. So.
It may be like kind of a winging it kind of thing, okay?
Yeah, no worries.
Let's just give it another couple minutes and then we'll take roll. If we don't have a quorum, if we're close, we'll leave it up to the task force members to see if you want to go on today or if we should just move today's stuff to next week.
Ray, I think we have a quorum.
All right, cool. Let's get started.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm assuming everyone can hear me since we have a dialogue. Today's agenda. Sorry.
Yep.
You guys still getting set up there?
No, go ahead. I was just making sure they could hear you well enough.
Okay, sounds good. Just to walk you through today's agenda, we have a welcome. Everyone welcome. Thanks for those who made it out in this weather. And thanks for all of those who are still able to join in the Zoom room and stay safe at home. On today's agenda, we'll be going through the roll call of task force members and then the consideration of minutes from the February 6th task force meeting. Then we will continue our consideration of recommendations on cannabis retail sales and with a focus on limitations on concentrations or locations since we wrapped up the permitting aspect last time. Then we will go into a brief, if that doesn't take up all our time, we can get into a brief review and determination of the roadmap for the cannabis ordinance. So kind of make a game plan and get everyone's input on what they want to focus on next. And then we'll open it up for public comments, and that will be today's meeting. So, Minon, Maria, I'll let you go ahead and take us through roll call.
Thank you. Okay, Will Weiss.
Present.
Dan.
I'm here by Zoom.
Great. Catherine Vanderwall.
Do not see her in the Zoom room.
Rebecca.
I'm on via Zoom.
Jennifer Smith.
I'm here in the room.
Mara.
I'm here in Zoom.
Andrew, did you tell me Robert?
Robert Geary will not be attending today.
Okay.
And
And
Chief
then-
Zapata will not be available, but I think I saw Paul in the Zoom room, just the first name.
I'm here.
Anyone representing the fire district chiefs?
Yeah, Paul Blues with Kelseyville Fire.
Super. Thanks, Paul, for making it today. All right, on to the next one. Consideration of the minutes from our last meeting, February 6th. Has everybody had a chance to skim over these minutes? So I'll take a motion unless there are any changes. Anyone from the task force?
One question, Maria. If, the discretionary process for the county, it only involves either a major or minor use permit, or are there additional discretionary?
We do have development review and design review, but development can actually be ministerial. Zoning permits are ministerial. So yeah, it's mainly just the major and minor.
Those two. Okay, yeah, because the intent was, just to say discretionary, but not necessarily to dictate what those should be. That would be, I guess, a question to the task force if that's how they thought we were voting, or if it was specifically saying minor or major use permit.
It sounds familiar to me too. Can anybody in the Zoom room on the task force or in the room, if you remember something differently, would you please go ahead and speak up? If not, we'll go ahead and amend those minutes to reflect that.
So wait, Maria, can you clarify or Nara, what is being clarified? I realize the word discretionary is at play, but what exactly are we?
Yes, just to have it be a to say have it be a discretionary process instead of dictating that it be a major or minor use permit. If there are other mechanisms at the county that are considered discretionary review, then we should let that be a decision for the county, I think, rather than us here.
Okay.
But keeping discretionary, that was, I think, the key word.
So then the recommendation is that it be a discretionary permit, but there is no recommendation from the task force regarding whether it should be a major or a minor. Is that correct, Nara?
Yes, that's what. Yeah,
Okay.
so that you all can decide based on the zoning.
This is Paul. I just wanted to make sure, because if I remember correctly from the last minutes, we had also agreed that the fire departments, the fire districts would be involved in that as well, correct? Regardless of whether it was a major, minor, what the permit application process was.
Yeah, I think that that's a given, Paul, because you'll get the RFR sent for your review when the project application is getting sent out as well.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify from myself.
The comments from the task force? Public, Bart? Bart? Okay, we're going to move on.
Okay.
Ready to accept the motion.
Motion to approve as amended. It's Nara for the.
I second that.
second.
Oh, okay.
We've got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed in the Zoom room? Raise your hand if you're opposed. If not, moving on.
And Maria, we should note as well, Catherine Vanderwall has also joined us just as of the moment that vote occurred, give or take. Sorry, Catherine, to call you up on it.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Take note that Catherine joined us at 1:07. Thank you. Okay, moving on to consideration of recommendations for cannabis retail sales limitations on concentrations or locations of cannabis retail sales. And I'll hand this back to Andrew.
Okay, so just a brief summary. At our last meeting on February 6th, the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force made recommendations, which were just confirmed in the approval of the minutes, to require minor use permit or discretionary permit for retail sales operations. And issues that are still up for recommendation include the regulations on concentrations or location of cannabis retail sales operations. So a quick review, as noted last time, we currently allow retail sales in the PDC zoning districts, C1 and C2 zoning districts. One correction from last time that I needed to include here is that there was one retail sales operation that was left out of the list. And that is the location that was mentioned towards the end of the meeting at the Kitts Corner area. So I wanted to make sure that was in there, and that changed our figures on concentrations a little bit to where Lake County, including our incorporated cities, would have one retail sales per 6,877 residents. And for the unincorporated county, which is our jurisdiction, we have one retail sales per 9,823 residents. Okay, moving on, discussion points still from the Board of Supervisors and the direction that they gave us. They wanted us to discuss the possibility of a buffer zone, discuss options for a maximum number of retailers allowed based on population, and discuss maintaining the 1,000-foot setback. In fact, I believe they requested that we maintain the 1,000-foot setback from schools, parks, churches, daycare centers, and other sensitive receptors, while also having up for discussion the options for delivery services. So recommended actions for today, that we provide recommendations on location limitation for retail sales, and further requests from the Board of Supervisors that we only focus on storefront retail with or without delivery for now, and that we do not focus on retail sales for micro businesses at this time, sorry. and other retail related issues can be reviewed at a later time. So I just want to throw that out there because we are going to get into the LCCA recommendations to the Cannabis Task Force regarding retail sales. And if you give me 1 second, I'm going to end the show. As I do this, I'm just going to pull up the PDF that was sent out to everyone. And is there anyone from the LCCA, whether Jennifer Smith in the room wants to walk us through this? Are you able to see this text well enough? I can zoom in a bit.
Yeah, I have a printed copy as well.
Okay, well, Jennifer, if you want to walk us through it, or I could just go ahead and read through it if you prefer.
I think a combination of both, Andrew, is what's going to work. I can speak anecdotally.
Okay.
A lot of it as well. I think what's important here, though, is to point out the different types of retail that we're talking about. Noted that you just reinforced that the board really only wants to talk about storefront retail at this point. I do feel like we will get further. I think that complicates the issue because we can nullify some of the concerns if we actually talk about this in a broader scope.
Okay. Well, those are, very valid points. And that's why, following this, I've included a segue into reviewing and discussing the roadmap as we move forward, because this topic, especially as we get into the license types and zoning, may very well lead right into our next topic. So let's go ahead and read through this. So for the state of California retail sales licenses, we have non-storefront retailers, type 9, which is delivery only. And a non-storefront retailer sells cannabis goods to customers only through delivery. Then we have our storefront retailers, a type 10 license. A storefront retailer has a physical location where cannabis goods are sold. Storefront retailers can also deliver cannabis goods. Then we have consumption lounges, which is one of those broader topics, but it's good to start considering now. Type 10 with a consumption cafe or lounge designation. I think I heard recent news that the city of Ukiah has just approved consumption lounges. Anyway, moving on, consumption lounges are permissible under state law according to local laws and regulations. It allows the consumption of cannabis products purchased on site as long as it is not visible from any public property or non-age restricted area. Cannabis consumption must be conducted on separate premises from alcohol sales. Currently, the sale of food or other beverages in consumption lounges is restricted, but state legislation has been proposed that may allow this in the future. On-farm retail consumption can be allowed through local jurisdiction to enable a tasting room model. So just to keep in mind, though, currently our ordinance does not allow for that at the moment. So that's something that would need to be changed. Anyway, moving on, additional state licenses, licensed activities, not addressed in these recommendations include microbusiness license type 12. That could be one path for the on-farm retail consumption. Businesses that do at least 3 of the following activities at one location. Cultivation up to 10,000 square feet, manufacturing, use of non-volatile solvents, mechanical extraction or infusion, distribution transport only, and retail storefront or non-storefront. So this type 12 is from the state. Since we're on the topic, I'm going to bring us over here. I believe it's on the very last page. You can let Article 27 load, which I will get to a little bit later. I'm not sure why I'm showing up blank. Anyway, let's get back to that. I'll keep getting through here. Let's see. We also have event organizer license and temporary cannabis events and event cannabis lodging, cannabis special events. I'm going to look on, see if there's more on this list on the next page. Nope. So Jennifer or Nara, if you want to speak to this any further, feel free to do so.
Karen, you want to start or?
Yeah, I think I certainly can. What we've provided is a table of all the zones in Lake County. And we wanted to show what's currently allowable on those, in those zones. And what's permitted or not permitted with cannabis, and then the recommended activity. And we really tried to pair this up, similar activity that's already being allowed, and understanding that through this process, we would add that layer of the minor use permit or the major use permit, so that we can expand the zones and there's more of a process rather than the at-will that has taken place in the CP zones. CP, right? So as you can, if we want to go through this ag preserve zone, currently you can have, bed and breakfast, you can have farm labor quarters, you can have a produce stand, you can have personal and caregiver cannabis cultivation, industrial hemp, and wine tasting rooms. And so especially where there's a wine tasting room allowed, we really tried to, again, have like business practices aligned. So in the ag preserve zone, we would like to allow for on-farm retail and consumption. And then you'll notice the same for the ag district, on-farm retail consumption in the same location where they can have personal cultivation, hemp, and wine tasting rooms. Timberland preserve, on-farm retail consumption, rural lands where we also have cultivation. We're looking for on-farm retail consumption. Again, they're also allowed wine tasting rooms. So as you go through this, the same with rural residential. They're allowed bed and breakfast. They're allowed farm labor quarters, produce stands, cultivation, hemp, and wine tasting rooms. And the wine tasting rooms, as you see in some of these, they do require a major use permit or minor use permit, sorry. Obviously, we've stayed away from the residential zoning, planned development. We've stayed away from that same in the PDR. In the PDC, we have recommended delivery, storefront, and retail consumption. And that's because it's already there, sorry. The highway commercial district, currently it's not permitted. There's no cannabis activity permitted. We are asking for retail consumption in those locations with a minor use permit for delivery and a major use permit for consumption. Resort commercial, we're asking for storefront retail consumption with both a minor and major use permit, depending on which path you go through. So I feel like we were very cognizant in the existing uses of the neighborhoods, so to speak, or the surrounding area. And again, just being mindful of what's out there. And this is our preference. We would like to go through this. I think that by allowing more use, more locations, and more zoning, you're going to see less concentration. And you're going to see, it's not going to appear so stacked in one city or another, or one region.
I think Jan has a question.
Great, I'm hoping there's lots of questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just have a real quick question. It's I know the ATF monitors liquor stores to make sure they're not selling to minors. The health department monitors the restaurants to make sure they're not serving unhealthy food. Who monitors retail sales of cannabis? Who makes sure they're not selling to minors and doing other things? How is this monitored?
So this would be monitored at both the local and the state level. There are state regulations that we would want to align with. There's security guards, there's inspections. There are cameras in and outside of the buildings that the state can log into at any moment. And I think it probably would be prudent to go through what some of those requirements are, and we should have brought that forth. And Nara, maybe while we're here, you can look some of that up. But the health department does inspections, sheriff can do inspections, building inspections. It's really no different than a wine tasting room or any building that goes through building inspections.
And just to quickly jump in terms of ID checking, because I think you're asking about, underage service in particular. Cannabis is more robust in terms of every person that purchases from either any licensed retailer, so that's delivery or a dispensary, you have your ID run and scanned. And so they have a record at the state and at the location that they're required to maintain, so that the state can come in and specifically check that. So it is much harder to serve underage. It has to be an ID that fully scans.
Thank you both for that. That helps a lot and clarifies what I needed. I would like to just make a note going forward that we make sure if this is put on a local, either law enforcement or county staff, we make sure some of this tax money goes to cover that. So I always believe you should never make rules that you can't enforce. So we're going to have enforcement on hand to make sure these are conducted properly. But I know that's for a later date, but let's keep it in mind. Thank you.
And there is a cannabis tax that is levied on all retail in place in the county already. It's a percentage of gross proceeds.
Did you say that was the county or the state?
County. And the state's got several taxes on it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Jan, did you have a further question or would you like to put your hand down? Move on to Nara.
All right. I agreed with Jen in terms of the looking at the sort of the forest for the trees here with excessive concentration. I think especially because we have this, and I don't agree with this 1,000-foot barrier and this buffer that the county's imposed. It's much stricter than what the state calls for. In both the sensitive uses that are identified, as well as the distance is much further than what the state actually requires, which is just 600 feet. And so that's how you end up with this concentration is allowing for it to only be in a specified zone with these huge buffers. It means that there's very small green zones for where you can actually locate a cannabis retail location. And part of the goal of this task force when we adopted our paragraph that was our mission statement or vision statement, was to talk about diversifying. And this is exactly that, because the county's taken a major pay cut because they invested heavily, and we're very glad they did in allowing cannabis here. But because it's mostly cultivation, they're not getting additional, as much additional tax revenue as there could be, given the amount of tourism that we grow for the quality of the wines that we have here. The quality of the cannabis here is on an equal level to the wines in terms of it being recognized for amazing quality and craftsmanship in our farmers here. So it allows for the farmers to diversify and be successful. And I think we all agree we don't want businesses just starting and failing in this county. And it's better for the county to get a broader tax base, like Jen was saying. So if there's a tasting room or a small farmer is allowed to sell what they grow on site, similar to how the tasting room language is written already in the county zoning code, then they're getting to capture the cultivation tax as well as the retail tax. And if the farmer is a micro business, then they will also be paying whatever the distribution tax is. And if we allow for very small scale, manufacturing on site, which would be like ice water hash or infusing products, then the county is getting that tax as well. And all of these things are really low impact and ways to create that thriving industry that's creating jobs and putting into the county as well as into the state. There is, Jan, just to answer your question on some of the resource issues, the state is starting to recognize how much counties are are putting in and how much they need to put in order to do more eradication of unlicensed grows and operations. And so there's a number of programs that the county's eligible for this year for the first time in terms of getting paid back for investigations and also being able to fund those investigations. And so I think it's probably prudent for the county to start to look into what money they're eligible for from the state from that cannabis tax money. So I think that's all I got.
Thank you, Nora. I do want to point out one quick fact while we have this on that first page with the micro business at the state level is allowed for businesses that do at least 3 of the following activities at one location, which includes cultivating, manufacturing, distribution, and then retail, which is what appears to be recommended. Our current ordinance for micro businesses does not include the retailing. It has manufacturing, cultivation, and distribution. And that's kind of the way it's set up. So this would need to be addressed to kind of open up that path.
You could also open up the path to farms that were, up to an acre or a couple acres in size. And it doesn't have to be a micro business that gets applied for. You can just apply for when you apply for micro business at the state, you still have to apply for all 3 license types anyway. So there's a way for the county to allow that. And it just doesn't, it just wouldn't technically be what the state would call a micro business, just because you do have some larger farms here that aren't huge either. So
true. Yeah. They would be too large to qualify for the micro business. So
right, exactly. But, potentially too small to be a really big farm that doesn't need the additional influx of income.
Okay, moving on with this document, we have
There's a question in the room.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay.
I was eventually going to speak up. I was just going to give Andrew a minute. So what was my question? You've ruined me. Keep going, Andrew. We'll come back. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I was just going to read this paragraph here. It says small wineries with an annual production capacity of 15,000 cases or less, including an incidental retail sales area of up to 750 square feet for wine produced and or bottled on the premise. Wine tasting facilities with up to 750 square feet of retail sales area on site with a minimum of 10 acres of planted vineyards. Restaurant up to 750 square feet in size may be permitted accessory to a wine tasting room. In each case, only winery and wine-related promotional events may be permitted as defined in the following section. So just want to touch upon that and then let's see. Okay.
So Andrew, I'm going to ask you right now, since this kind of even ties into what you just read. So what was the reason that the Board of Supervisors advised to exclude the micro businesses question? Because without meaning to go too broad on this, it feels like some of what has been addressed in the document that we've been looking at here dips way into that. And so I'm just curious what the reasoning was to not dive into.
I think the reasoning was that they knew the micro business and the micro business concept and the potential of micro business might be a strong path forward for cannabis in Lake County. And it's probably a much bigger, broader discussion as we're seeing here in this table, in this document. Okay. It's a lot to cover. I think right now we're seeing several retail operators pop up on main streets across the county without even needing a permit. And there was some concern that the county's, all of our main streets are going to be full of dispensaries. So
I think what's important to note though on the micro business, it sounds scarier than it really is, but if you have distribution or transport only somewhere else, you have retail here or manufacturer somewhere else, you can still get that micro business at the state. So, micro business, sorry. If it's allowed in any of those other areas. So it's not really anything, you still have to go through the steps of whatever local municipality you want to have each of those types in. You still have to go through this individual steps of each one of those licenses at the local and the state license before you can even get that micro business.
It was meant to be easier, but they didn't really make it easier at the state level. So and that trickles down to the county.
Yeah, so the county still does have, tight control of that.
This is Paul. I actually have a question. I wanted to jump back just a little bit, if that's okay. And this is just out of my own general curiosity. What do you guys mean by a cannabis special event? And I'm only asking because when I hear special event, I start thinking, with me being in Kelseyville, the Pear Festival, and that's immediately where my mind goes when I hear special event. So I'm just trying to get clarification on what a cannabis special event might look like.
I can talk about this a little bit because I think we've been looking at it at the fair as well. So there can be like events of that size. Cannabis would be very restricted in terms of where it could be. But events can be as small as, a dinner party, or if someone wanted to have cannabis at their wedding. That's a license type that the state offers as a cannabis event license holder. And then you have to apply for a cannabis special event permit at both the state and local level, at the local and state level as well. But you have to have that cannabis event holder's license, and then it has to be done at a location that can have a cannabis event. And so that's part of opening us up. So if a winery actually, well, they can now because the law just changed. If they were going to lock up their wine for the day and they wanted to have a cannabis event on site, they could potentially be able to do that. Or if a cannabis existing cultivator wanted to have an educational event or ecotourism event, and have folks there for a weekend or a day or two, or for just a few hours, then that would be an event, and they would bring in a licensed event holder, or they would apply for the license themselves, and then they would have to get a special permit for that. So it's
okay, not a problem. Thank you very much for clarifying on that. I really appreciate it.
And we intentionally didn't put that in this retail outline. But definitely something to discuss it through this process.
Most events would like retail though, so that's also part of why the discussion happens, is that you would have to be able to have retail at that site in order to be able to have an event at that site.
One of the things that I think we need to consider as the task force is if there is task force consensus on the position of diversification of zoning districts that allow for retail, because that's kind of the premise that is all the table that was presented to us. But so we're going to need some clarity going forward as to whether or not that position or that recognizing the diversity is something that the task force recommends. We have a little discussion on that, task force members.
Do you want a motion for that, Maria?
Well, we had the presentation, which is great, but what we didn't have a lot of discussion on whether or not the task force agrees that diversification is a recommendation that we have. So I just want us to proceed with clarity on that one. If there's no discussion, we could move towards some sort of recognition, either by, I prefer a motion. Yeah.
One thing I would like to say about the presentation that they just presented was that with a lot of these doing the retail at the site of the cultivation premises, is that a lot of the things that we just discussed in the last document that we had are going to be kind of null and void the minute you start putting retail into it, because you're talking about mercantile occupancies, retail, civilians coming in and out. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about as far as the 4290 standards, that all comes back into play again the minute that those retail operations, the on-site consumption, all of that,
And that's understood.
kind of change that dynamic
Yes.
again.
Absolutely.
That would absolutely. That's
And that alone serves, sorry, I just want to follow up that alone serves as a limiting factor, because we are here trying to come to some recommendations for the board on limitations on how many are out there. So a good number of our outdoor cultivators are in areas where, some of the roads might not meet those standards for a retailer. And that will just be part of the review of these retail operations.
And important to note that not everybody wants to do this. Not every place is accessible. Not every place has the buildings. This is just a path for those that would like to do this.
Right.
And it also, again, lessens the potential for that concentration on Main Street. In Main Street, I'm just using that term generically.
The other side of the micro businesses, I briefly mentioned this, but we are talking about retail today, which is why I didn't want to jump into it too much, would be something like, having just that manufacturing on site of like mechanical separated cannabis, which is, we should probably chat about. It's a washing machine. So if the county permits a home up there, they've already permitted the use of a washing machine, and that's all the technology that's needed for that, really. And that would be then, maybe they wouldn't want to do retail, but maybe they want to. There's a real art and craft to hash making, and a lot of times the farmers would like to be able to do that themselves. And then you wouldn't have to necessarily have the retail road standards, but micro businesses can be something besides retail. Or it could be certain road standards if it was a delivery only dispensary too, might have different road standards.
If we've got through the task force commentary, we do have 2 hands raised in the Zoom for public. First one is Bart and then Zaro. Bart. I think it's Bart 6205. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you so much. Jan made a comment earlier about wanting to make sure that there are funds that are going to go to enforcement, et cetera. And I just wanted to remind everybody that the current budget estimate for the incoming revenue and taxation for cannabis for 2023-24 is only 1.5 million. 4 million is already committed for salary incentives. So there isn't a sign of a revenue that would cover much of anything at this point.
Thank you, Bart. Zaro?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I have a very simple question because I missed the last meeting, unfortunately, but it says on the micro business licenses that the cultivation is up to 10,000. I just want to make sure that that's it. If you have more than that, you won't be able to go for a license, right? Or you can use it on the on-farm retail consumption if you got more than 10,000 square feet.
Zaro, for the micro business, that would not be the option. However, there are other paths to have an operation that has multiple licenses, not just the micro business format, I guess. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Looks like Angela, if you're guest, go ahead. And Bart and Zaro, if you wouldn't mind putting your hands down, that way I'll know when they come up again. Angela? Or whoever is guest. Not hear you, guest. Okay, perhaps we can come back to guest. So where are we? A general consensus then regarding support for diversification. That means opening up other zoning districts to allow for retail as a method of sort of spreading them out and minimizing that concentration in commercial zones? Anybody who disagrees with that one, maybe that's easier way to go.
Maria, I think you just answered the question from guest in the chat. They wrote, "Are we proposing outside of zones C1 and C2?" So
That's the exact conversation we're having right now.
that's the question. Are we officially making that recommendation? Or is there?
I mean, I think everyone knows how I feel, so I don't know if I need to.
How is it agendized? Is it agendized as an information item, or can we make a,
Review. No, excuse me.
is that item 4, is that consideration of the recommendations? Is that?
Yes,
The
that's
recommendations. Good
Okay.
question. If somebody would like to offer a motion then.
I make a motion that we expand the zoning for retail operations in the county.
Is that Jennifer or Catherine? I couldn't tell.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, okay, so you would make a recommendation then?
Yes, I make a recommendation.
Clarifying
Weeks.
question, is that based on the document that LCCA submitted, or is that just a general?
I think we're going for the general consensus first, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
I think so.
yeah. I would second.
Motion?
I will second it if you don't have other second.
Nora, okay.
We got Nara and Will, or Will, was that?
I'm yielding to Nora, that's fine.
Go for it. You take it.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, verbalize, and then if you're against, raise your hand in the Zoom room. Aye, all in favor.
I,
Anyone against in the room or in conference room B? And is there anyone against that would show you by raising your hand in the Zoom room? Okay, good. We've established that. Thank you. So now we can move on to specifics from the item, right? Andrew, is that our next one?
yes. With the two primary factors being a limitation on concentrations or a limitation on location in the form of a setback. So I guess we could address the concentration aspect first, whether or not the county wants to do that. So the language from the state, offers a guideline towards that, but they really leave it up to the county. And then don't believe let's see if we have some of that information here. Yes. Okay. So to give, for the concentration restrictions, the top section shows counties without a concentration restriction and the number of, their population with the number of dispensaries, and you get that ratio. Below that, you have counties with concentrations on restrictions, sorry. And they usually put those as a limit to the number of retail sales. Yolo County has it in 2 forms. Sonoma County has a limit, but keep in mind, Sonoma County is just for the unincorporated part, not the cities within Sonoma County. And then Santa Cruz has their own hard limitation. You could do it as a ratio. You could do it as a set number. It would still create a ratio. I'm not sure if Lake County wants to go this direction or not. It's up. The recommendation is up to you. So I'll leave that to you to discuss. Jan, okay, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Can hear you.
I'm kind of thinking that the market would dictate concentration. I don't have a fear that we're going to have 25 stores pop up on Main Street because they'd all be competing with each other. This seems to be scaling down, not ramping up. So I'm not sure that we need to put a really a low number for concentration. I don't think we have to be so stringent that we, eliminate this, but that's just my opinion. I'd be willing to hear what everybody else has to say.
I'm a big proponent of free enterprise and would not like to see caps.
Yeah. Right.
Again, like you said, nobody's rushing down, beating down the doors to open up retail spots on or off their farms.
All right. I believe you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we've addressed I think the most of that concern with having this become a discretionary process so that it can be considered, the distance, and the county's buffer is unnecessarily large. So considering the size of the commercial districts and things like that, so I think there's not going to be a whole lot necessarily coming in. And from what I understand, you need to have pretty high foot traffic to make money in retail right now, and the state tax is being very heavily absorbed by retailers right now, entirely actually. So I think Jan is right, and Jen on this. It's I think the market is going to dictate.
Okay. Thank you. Rebecca, I believe your hand is up.
Yeah, I just have a brief question, and I think Nara may have answered it with her response. So we are not discussing the possibility of changing buffer zones at all today, are we?
At the moment, we're looking at concentrations. When you look at any restrictions on locations in the form of a setback essentially creates a buffer from something. So it's not part of this immediate item that we're talking about, but it is part of the conversation. So it could be it's up to you guys, really. So that answers your question.
Yeah, so far the supervisors was to address density and any recommendations for density. And so far, this task force has done it in a few different ways. Pretty much what I think Nara and Jennifer were saying earlier. One, you're recommending that the retail permit become discretionary. Secondly, then responding or making a recommendation to diversify the allowed zoning districts. So far, those are two direct responses. It's not mandatory that the task force consider these concentration restrictions or any further buffer zones if it does not desire to do so.
Thank you.
Something that was brought up in the chat regarding the concentrations and everything, how will that be? They brought up the 9 armed robberies of dispensaries in Sonoma County. Is there going to be some sort of, with these concentrations, some sort of increased security based off of the amount that they have, or is it going to be something that's just common across the board depending on what that concentration is?
Well, our current ordinance has certain standards for security, but at the state level, it's really where the security plays in, and the state's heavily involved with how these retail locations can be designed. There's a certain entryway and, an area to be carded, and that's where those measures come into play. As far as any other measure to prevent robberies, it's up for discussion, I suppose. So
I think there are already regulations in both our code and at the state level that require security. I don't know that we'd make it more.
On-site security is required at retail. During operating hours, there's a very extensive camera system that is required at retail, both inside and outside, over the registers in the storage room. Storage area is very delineated and has, extra requirements of how it must be secured from staff and general public. All of those are in the state guidelines. And to date, we already have several retail locations, and I believe I'm not mistaken when I say there's been no unlawful activity at any of those, no criminal activity.
The guest who made that comment had another comment. The state regs did not prevent any of those robberies. The county needs its own regs. So any above and beyond regulations and requirements for security at these locations.
I mean, I don't know what else could be added that, isn't already. The cameras are higher resolution than almost any other industry. They're required to be kept for, is it 6 months, Jen? Something like that.
Yeah.
And it's really about the local law enforcement and where we're seeing spikes in crime. It's cannabis and it's other crimes as well. So, it's I guess as the industry, as the market crashes, it's less valuable, but it's a valuable commodity. But people aren't. I don't know why you would come all the way to Lake County to commit crimes, and there's a lot. There's a lot of other criminal activity that.
I'm going to also want to make sure that we're staying close to our agenda, which is the discussion of density.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said also for the appearance. I think suddenly it'll, if the county starts adding extra onerous security things for the state, then suddenly you're going to have something that looks like an armory, and and folks marching around outside with weapons or something like that. I think that's not going to be a look that anyone's going to want in a commercial corridor either. So,
Rebecca?
Sorry, Maria, my question's answered.
Okay, super. Let's see, Jan, your hand's up.
Sorry, I have to unmute in two places. As far as security, nobody wants to get robbed. Robbery is already against the law. I don't see where we could add anything more without really being overboard. Early on, yeah, people were robbing these places, but I think a lot of these robbers found out there's pretty intense security, and I'm not concerned with security as much because I think we have pretty heavy duty regulations in place to take care of that stuff. So that's not an issue for me.
I have a kind of related follow-up question. When we talked about this last time, I brought up a sort of a related question about security that had been brought to me by one of the folks who loves to communicate with me about these things ahead of meetings. And the thought regarding law enforcement's involvement in deciding on permitting for such businesses was brought up. Has that been clarified at all, Maria or Andrew? I mean, or can you speak to that just to clarify for the record? There's, I think, already a mechanism in place to have some evaluation and review of the public safety concerns to putting one of these businesses in. Is that right?
We do. The majority of our operations require a security plan. And when we send out that RFR, that request for review to other agencies, it goes to the sheriff's department and they often provide comments on the security plan.
Okay.
So will that be similar for these businesses or?
As they're going into the discretionary use permit process, yes, it will be.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's open it up to the public. Bart, go ahead. And then
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Michael. Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to make a comment again to Jan. There's a series of articles recently about a series of burglaries in Sonoma County, people coming in from outside counties using their vehicles after hours to ram the metal gates of dispensaries. And I want to point out that in our county, there are times when the sheriff's department is so short-staffed that there are only 2 people on patrol for the entire county. Middletown does not have a substation and does not have any security in place and no plan for it. The sheriff's department is understaffed at this point somewhere between 25 and 30%, if not more. And again, the budget has been slashed. What's coming in from cannabis is only expected to be 1.5 million revenue this year, as opposed to 2 years ago, it was 6 to 8 million. So we're operating in a deficit, and you're assigning to areas of the county that they have security when they do not.
Michael?
Yeah, I just had a question. If anybody has any data, we're talking about robberies in Sonoma County. How many liquor stores have been trashed or robbery occurred in the same time span when these 9 robberies in dispensaries happened?
Thanks, Michael. Again, before we go rabbit holing down about security standards, unless that has a direct connection to our discussion of density, we've been assigned to talk about, or on our agenda is the item to discuss density of retails, not necessarily the development and design standards that we're going to hold them to, security being one of the many requirements. So if we could keep it centered on our discussion about density, that'll help us accomplish our agenda item today. And it looks like Angela and Bart, could you put your hand down, please? Because it hasn't gone down yet. And then go ahead, Angela.
All right. I think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for all the confusion. I just could not get this thing to work. So the reason that I wanted to ask that was because we're talking about moving these out of traditional commercial zones. We're a pretty spread out county. So if we're going to expand the areas they're going to be in with an already stretched thin law enforcement, we're going to have to do something. If you're going to put these out into other areas, we're going to have to do something to protect not only the business, but the residents that live around it. There's always been a criminal element here. Illegal operations don't report to the police when they get robbed. We know that people come from out of the county into the county. So it's just something that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about pushing these out of the traditional commercial zones that have a high traffic or a police presence already in them. That was the only reason that I brought that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Go ahead, Nora.
Oh, we're not supposed to respond to public comment, right? I had a...
Oh, we take it in.
Okay.
So then bringing it back to the task force, now that we've got consensus that we think diversification is a recommendation, do we want to take a look then at the specific table and have discussions regarding the proposed uses in the different zones?
I think it's a great idea.
This is one area where I wanted to jump in, and I think it'll help address some of the concerns too from the public. Is the wineries and tasting rooms that are allowed with limited retail in those zones have a really specific language, and I think Andrew read that at the bottom of this. If we scroll down.
Sure.
Having some kind of limiting language like that would change sort of the atmosphere of that retail, or the amount of product or what product's on site.
Do you mean similarly, like limiting it to a 750 square foot retail space?
That, and also if you look, it's a state produced wine, and so they may not be bringing in other product, right? That there may be certain restrictions in some of these zones, like there is on alcohol. That okay, this is the Six Sigma tasting room, right? And so you're not going to buy Beaver Creek wine at Six Sigma tasting room or whatever it is that they're licensed to taste and pour and sell their own product. and that's actually that would be and that's a tourist draw. People come here for that, right? So it would be that idea of going to, of having that as the, as a potential restriction on some of these smaller, areas or that are a little further out there, and where things are easier to get to, that you may be able to have more expanded retail, have the restaurants, have the, I think following I would say, one of my goals is always to normalize cannabis, and so it would be bringing cannabis into the existing county code in a way that's thoughtful, but also because that research and the plans and all of that has been done and decided, that cannabis would fit in with that, not come in and steamroll that.
Thank you. Your input from the task force.
I have a question for the task force, maybe for Will or someone more familiar with viticulture than I am. When you look at 15,000 cases or less as the threshold for the capacity, how many acres of vineyard does that translate to? Or does anyone know that answer? Because I do not.
To be totally honest with you, I could figure it out if you gave me a second to Google around on my phone and like do some quick math, but I don't have the answer in front of me. But let's say it's like, gosh, I feel silly making a guess at it and then being wrong. But you asked, well, how do I feel about 15,000 cases being the threshold designate between one type of permitting or activity of a business and another? 15,000 cases is not is not a large constraint on the number of businesses that could do. I mean, there are lots of wine producers who fit within the 15,000 case limit, and so I would imagine that's a relatively broad categorization as far as wineries go. Then again, there are many inside Lake County that greatly exceed that, right? So like by a factor of 10 times. And if this were the sort of language that would pertain to them if they were smaller, I mean, I could see, anyway, there are a large number of producers who fit within the confines of a 15,000 case limit. If that is to your question. As for the size of the property, give me a moment. I'll have something to say on that in a minute.
Andrew, can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So on average, just depending on productivity of variety, every acre is equivalent to about 190 to 300 cases of bottled wine.
Okay.
Okay, Rebecca, if you want to take your hand down, we've got two members of the public.
Oh, sorry. Can I?
Go ahead, Nora.
Well, one thing that you mentioned that I actually skipped over was the layers of discretionary review for the intensity of whatever the retail or tasting room would be, and I think that's written in there too, and I missed that, which is a minor use permit for what's allowed with a minor use permit versus what's allowed with a major use permit, and I think that's another way for us to make sure that we're not bringing something that shouldn't be there, but allowing for as much as people can do appropriately with the land use.
Sure, and while the two processes are quite similar, a minor use permit is somewhat more streamlined than a major use permit. So.
Yeah, and there's layers for the tasting rooms I noticed in the zoning code. So.
We have some hands up. I guess. Well, Maria, I guess, do you want to open it back up to public comment? Or I'm not sure if public comment was ever really closed.
I'm not really, I haven't gotten a clear understanding of where we're kind of going as the task force. As far as
have a comment.
Consensus. One moment, please, Bart. Just if we're fine with the recommendations that are in the table, if we have further discussion, if so, I want to keep that in the task force right now until we have a sense that we have a consensus someplace, and then we'll open it up for public. there any areas of this table that give the task force members pause? Any areas of concern? Seeing anything in conference room, and I'm not seeing anything. Go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say, or because it just went out to the task force members on Friday, do any of them need any more time to review it more carefully? I know Maria likes to work towards a motion.
This is Paul. I would personally like to get some more feedback from the rest of the fire chiefs, if possible, because it did just come out on Friday.
Any other input from?
Should we send this to the ad hoc committee? Is this an ad hoc committee thing?
Which ad hoc?
Or whatever it was for the group that
The ag structures and
Fire
temporary
chief, Farm
structures.
Bureau,
Yeah.
LCCA. I don't
Yeah.
know that we really need to do that.
Okay.
Rebecca, jump in if you think I'm mistaken, but I think that ad hoc committee was just for that other one.
Very specific, because it was agricultural, ag exempt stuff. That makes sense.
So
Yeah, I don't think that's necessary, but certainly if Paul needs more time to review this, I support anybody who needs more time.
agreed. This is Will speaking, and I would also just like to chime in to answer Andrew's comment because I think Rebecca may have been sort of half right. It kind of depends on the variety of wine grapes you were growing, but a 15,000 case operation would necessitate between 25 and 50 acres of wine grapes, depending on the variety and the yield, just to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. It's good to know.
Okay, so we're leaning towards tabling or continuing our discussion regarding the specific table towards our next meeting.
Yeah. Can I add one thing in for the ag folks to consider and fire to consider is, would that 5 acre between a medium and a large grow that just got implemented at the state, would that be equivalent? And could we look at whether that's equivalent? Sorry, it's a snow day from school. Yeah, so the like a 5 acre. Yeah.
So
That-
the
I guess
question-
probably a question for Jen and Jen, who knows both wine and cannabis, whether that's equivalent in terms of size and production and things like that for us to consider.
I think the challenge there is going to be that everybody's production style is very, very different and their yields are very different. So I'm not sure how that can be a factor other than if perhaps it's just an overall, I'm obviously not going to advocate for us to get even more restrictive, but
Yeah, right.
I guess if you have to, then look at total canopy, that you're not going to be able to do a production.
Right. I worry about getting pigeonholed into that. I want to make sure we don't get stuck in that 10,000 square foot.
I don't think that was ever part of it.
Okay.
That's a good sub piece, I think, to add to our agenda is if we do want to stagger it, stagger the discretionary review level based on
Size.
Where is that number? Let's make sure we discuss that next week because it'll give us, I think it's good to have an opportunity to think about it, even though, yes, Andrew's right. I do like to go for the motion where I can. But I think that in this case, that deliberation would be really helpful for the board. That's Jan's hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood. I don't see anything on this chart that gives me heartburn, but if we were to approve and, adopt this, before anything was to be able to be permitted, they would have to have fire department's review, right? It's not like if we pass this today, the fire department doesn't get to weigh in each time a person applies for a new permit. So, they could say this wouldn't work in this location or whatever. Is that correct? I just want to make sure we're not passing something that the fire department has to swallow and accept no matter what. They still will have a review here, right?
Yes, so the fire department would have review with the RFR process, since it's going to either be a minor or a major. Then additionally, after it gets approved, the building permit would require fire fees, so they're going to see it then too.
So I'm comfortable with this, and I would be willing to make a motion to adopt it, but we'll hear what everybody else has to say. But yeah, I don't see anything on here that would give me any kind of heartburn.
Okay, let's open it up to the public, and then we'll come back to you, Jan, to see if you want to make that motion at that time. Looks like Bart.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Time and again, I've heard the fire chief say that what's wrong here is that they are already maxed out with their personnel and their equipment, that whenever there's a more remote location or an added number of locations where there's an injury, a 911 call, or a fire, it means that the next injury or fire may take longer to be answered. And I hear this task force not really being in reality about our county, our shortages here, and our flammability. FEMA calls Lake County a fire factory. 65% of this county has already burned in fires. We are dearly at risk, and we are asking the fire departments to stretch beyond what they know they have capacity for. When we have Paul Blewis at this table, he hasn't had the opportunity to get back with all the fire chiefs all around the county, as he should be able to get their input about what's safe for their areas. I think it's really hasty and inappropriate to push this at this time.
Bart, Michael, you're next, and then Sarah.
I just have a question. Do we have a timetable for wrapping up this discussion and proposal and present it to the board of supervisors? And if we do, what is that? If not, I believe we should have a due date by when all of this has to be wrapped up and presented, because time is passing and we're just talking.
You.
I could answer that. The board gave no specific timeline. So,
but we should have something. We should put something, and because this is on our side.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Go ahead, Sarah. I can just actually add to that a little bit. It had not crossed my mind that this item might be of interest to the Agricultural Advisory Committee. But now that we're talking about retail out in rural areas, I need to run that by Catherine, I guess, and Supervisor Pyska to see if they want to comment on it. If not, then the recommendations of the task force will be taken to the Planning Commission as soon as they're ready. And then after that, then they go to the board.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Sarah. And Michael and Bart, if you could put your hands down, please. Oh, thanks. Great.
Hi, this is Sarah Bodner, Policy Director for LCCA. And as we were putting together this grid, I wanted to just point out a couple of things. This is a lot of information in one chart. And so I understand if there are some folks that want to spend a little more time digesting it, but we really did do our best to try to simplify, looking at the whole county, where would be the appropriate place to expand and diversify retail. And what is not evident from looking at this chart is how small these areas are that we're talking about. We were hunched around the map, like zooming in, to little tiny areas. So what might sound like, oh, this is opening up a lot of new regions and areas, we looked at where commercial cannabis is already allowed, or where like agriculture activities are already allowed. And because of the nature of the zoning in Lake County, these are really small areas. So if anybody's going to spend some more time looking into this, I would encourage you to look at how this overlays with an actual physical map, and know that we're probably talking about a small handful of businesses that would meet these restrictions. And then, of course, the whole process will be discretionary in everything that we've proposed, whether it's a minor use permit or a major use permit. And there is loads of agency review involved in all of that and planning department review. So I just wanted to provide a little context about what might seem simple. This was not simple to put together. And I also want to just say thanks for this process. I think this task force has become such a productive discussion space. And thank you to Maria and Andrew for your work in like driving us towards the motion and also giving space for the conversation. I would really look forward to a group discussion on this at the next meeting and see if we could agree on something. Thank you.
Where are we now? Task force, Paul has requested additional time for review with the other fire chiefs. And Jan is ready to make a motion now. Where do we want to fall on that?
I could make a friendly amendment that we come back and hear what the fire chiefs have to say. I think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to have fire represented on this task force if if they don't think that they have the time to really consider what's in front of them. So I would say friendly amendment to Jan's motion to give an extra couple weeks for fire to look at it.
And I'm willing to hold off on that motion.
Okay, so if
Fire's gonna get all the review they want on a project by project basis and more review of any cannabis activity that they've had in the past.
okay, do we have consensus then on carrying this item over to the next meeting? So far, we do have action taken today, which was the support for the diversification of the zoning districts. It's just the specifics of the table that we're still discussing.
And Maria, it seemed like the task force was potentially ready to make a motion to choose not to have any restrictions on concentration based on population. I felt like
I know that they need a motion so long as they're just not taking that up.
okay.
Yeah, I think we're still fine there. All right, I'll give the task force a minute to think about it. Let's open it up to public again. Go ahead, Tim.
Hello, can you hear me? No, you
Yes.
can't. Okay,
We can
all right.
hear.
I'm just a quick question or about security. Is there going to be a discussion about security at some point?
Take that up when the task force starts doing the work that they were originally intended to do, which is take a look at the holistic process rather than just the priorities that are getting sent to them from the Board of Supervisors. So yeah, that can be included at that time.
Thank you.
And I would like to address that after we get through this item. when
Yes.
on the agenda, the roadmap's there. I don't need a ton of time, but I do need to set us up for the future.
Okay, so I don't see any any objection to the consensus of tabling the consideration of the table or continuing it to our next meeting. Am I
I think
mistaken?
Jen may have.
I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead, Jen.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt and include fire comments during the conditions of approval of each project. So adopting this table.
Make a motion to adopt the table as it stands.
Correct.
I would second that.
Have a motion and a second.
Can I ask for discussion before we go to a vote? Unless Maria, you were going to say something important.
I was just going to get the roster back up so we could make sure we've got an accurate vote on that one. But go ahead, Will.
So I mean, I'm sitting here wondering, and I'm not. I do not presume to know the work of a firefighter, Paul, but I'm wondering if you can sort of speak to what concerns you think your peers might have, just because it without meaning to hurry it along, I'd really very much like to hear Chief Zepeda's input and some of your peers as well, if they have input on this, and I don't want to blow past them in the process. So if what we're talking about is delaying 1 week, I'm not sure that it actually matters in the end. But what I did want to point out is that all of the comments that have been made aside regarding the flammability of Lake County and all that, I'm not really convinced of the greater fire risk of having cannabis retail outfits in various places in the county. I mean, again, I'm more than willing to yield to the fire departments if they would like to have another moment to review and get the input of folks who were not able to be at this meeting. But anyway, Paul, I'm pitching it to you, buddy. I'm wondering if you have any just like clue as to what their input might be, or if you really just want to make sure you give them a chance to review before we proceed.
It's really just to kind of give them a chance to review before they proceed and present any questions that they may have, because I haven't heard back from any of the fire chiefs yet regarding this, because it came out so last minute. So I would just like to give them a chance to review and come back with any questions that they may have regarding it.
Okay. In which case, are we meeting next week? I realize this is not the time. 2 weeks from now. So, I mean, is it going to change the timeline of any individual businesses if we wait 2 weeks for Chief Cepeda and or others to offer input? I don't know, but I'm open to that possibility.
I think there's also a chance of it getting hung up in planning or, other departments if we've incorporated comments here earlier. But
as in, sorry, clarifying, Nara, you're saying that better to include comments from the...
If there's going to be, something significant or, some major issue, I think, we're better to tackle that here at the task force level, and then, have it hopefully move through through to the Board of Supervisors faster, because we've
there's truth to that too.
We do have a motion and a second, though. So we kind of need to move forward with that. So then this would be a motion and a second for approval of the table as it stands.
So it's just the zones it would be allowed in.
Right.
It's not the actual regulation of what it looks like for the structure, for the retail outlet. It's just the zoning.
or the discretionary review of the fire department and building department when they get the application.
Andrew, why don't you go ahead and do a roll call with the task force members, please?
Okay. William Weiss.
On the motion as it stands to adopt the table, I will vote no.
Jan Coppinger.
I would vote yes.
Catherine Vanderwall.
I'm going to abstain because I would like to give the fire chiefs, the opportunity for input because they do have a seat at the table.
Rebecca Harper.
I'd second Catherine's sentiment in postponing this till the next time they're available to give input.
Well, just to be clear, that was when Will voted no, I think that was the purpose of the no vote.
That's entirely what the purpose of the no vote was. Yeah, it was not actually a no vote. It was that, but yeah.
Would that be a motion to table then? Another motion?
Oh dear. Are we really going to go into Rosenberg's rules of order?
Oh, this could get fun. I think the simplest thing is for Ms. Coppinger to modify her motion.
It was my motion.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. I'm so sorry.
I'm just okay. I mean, obviously we can see where the votes are going to lie. So why don't we table this for further discussion by the fire department?
I'm good with that too.
Okay. So we'll continue this. It'll be our top of the agenda item for next meeting. We're down to about 5 minutes. So, and one more public input from Bart. But before we go there, let's give Andrew just a couple minutes to sort of lay it out in front of you of what we're hoping for as far as input from the task force regarding our order of events in the future. Because we now have no ordinances to consider that the board is saying is a priority, so we can actually start doing what we were, first all gathered to do. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
So let's finish up. Bart, if you have something real quick, that'd be great. Make it snappy, please. And then Sarah, and then we'll go on to Andrew's closing us out.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I heard a gentleman say he's not convinced about the greater fire risk, and I'm appalled to hear that statement and appalled that anybody in this room should be sitting in any official capacity making decisions about that are going to affect the well-being of the entire county when we all know that 65% of this county has already burned, and we are considered by FEMA to be the #1 fire factory.
Thanks, Bart. Sarah?
Just a quick question about the process of the ag structures ordinance, and if you can give an update about when that might be going before the commission or the board.
Thank you. So we had a discussion about that ordinance today at the Agricultural Advisory Committee. And so I am going to work with Catherine, who was taking great notes, to sort of distill some consensus from their discussion, which I will then run by Sharon and present. Sharon Zoller is sort of their chair, I think. And then it should get to the Planning Commission by their March 23rd meeting and then on to the board after that. Any follow-up questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, just in the last few minutes, you guys have seen a version of this in a previous presentation. This is generally what our articles look like in our zoning ordinance, within chapter 21, our zoning ordinance. And as we wrap up this recently assigned one-off item, we need to get back to taking a holistic approach to recommendations. So I wanted to bring this up. We were kind of naturally getting into zoning and licensing, and the fact that we're already visiting zoning for retail means it might be a nice segue. But in all honesty, I wanted to leave it up to you guys. The task force should be making that decision. So something to think about as we move forward. And in terms of how we want to approach this, these are just some general items you find in a typical article. The applicability would cover the zoning and licenses. And then we can get into uses permitted. Here we're looking at different uses at the zoning clearance level, zoning permit level, ministerial being the top two, and then discretionary being the bottom two, minor use permits and major use permits. Then we can get into performance standards. That's essentially where you're going to see those security plans, those on-site, site-specific issues in terms of the environment of the site and its safety, as well as air quality and electrical issues, et cetera. And then we can visit development standards, which can get into more of the broader area instead of just the parcel of land that it's on. How is it affecting the surrounding parcels? Again, I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation. There's no set order. You guys can pick and choose whether we want to visit development standards first, then get into performance standards, or, continue to follow this conversation on zoning and licensing, because that does kind of set everything else up. I did want to show you a couple of examples of what we're looking at currently. So here, Article 6. This is our article on timber preserve zone. And essentially it has its purpose, its applicability, application requirements, performance standards, uses permitted through various ways, uses permitted with a minor use permit. This is how a typical article within our zoning ordinance tends to look. Another example, here's R3. It's not purpose, applicability. Then it goes right into performance standards, which refers to Article 41 over here, which is a fuller article on all the different performance standards countywide for a lot of our parcels. Some are a little less conventional, PDC, plan development commercial. You definitely get into special requirements for specific development plans or specific plans of development. They get really detailed in terms of applying to both the general plan or policy and our regulatory zoning ordinance. But then we have, and I already visited a little bit ago, Article 27, which is a very different article. And that's part of our greater task, is to pull cannabis out of Article 27, and it's going to be its own standalone article. Now here, this is all about use permits, and use is generally permitted. We are a permissive county. If it's not on this list, it's generally not allowed. But as we get through everything that's allowed with a zoning permit, we'll scroll on down. This is definitely the longest article we have in our ordinance. Then we get into different zoning districts for a major and minor use permit. So that first part of the document all the way up here is about the ministerial aspects. Then we get into discretionary. And as you can see here, the last table in this discretionary chart is for commercial cannabis activities. And once you get through all the other uses that are allowed through a discretionary use permit, the last one on this list at AT, we're coming up to it, is where we get into commercial cannabis. And there should be here, this table gets in here and it jumps. It doesn't read very well. I mean, there's a lot of room for improvement here. You're jumping right into development standards, general requirements, and a table. And this is where the different license types have minimum lot sizes, setbacks from the property line, maximum canopy square footage per the acres required. So, one thing we see a lot would be like the 20 acre per 1 acre type 3 license. So, which is right here. So, anyway, moving on, then our regulations, general requirements, they jump in with some basic requirements at the state level. A lot of this language could be cleaned up. Some of these departments don't exist anymore, and it could be improved to just address the overall state regulatory agencies with certain language. But anyway, moving on, I just wanted to let you know what we are currently dealing with. It gets into sections and subsections, and it takes the reader and the user straight into the application process without going through all the rules and regulations. So I just want you guys to keep this in mind on how this document can be improved. And going back to the PowerPoint slide over here, just to kind of maybe bring it back to the format of the rest of the zoning ordinance and the usability. We want to, county council has advised that definitely you want to make this as user-friendly as possible. So that is one opportunity. So keep in mind for the next meeting, what areas you would like to tackle first, because we are going to start looking at the bigger picture. Nara, I believe your hand.
Can we vote on that? Yeah, if we can't vote on it today, can we vote on that at the next meeting so that we lay out a timeline, especially for the farmers and folks that are watching? Is that something we can tackle next time?
Yeah, I'm hoping sorry, Maria. Sorry, Maria, can you say that again?
Yeah, sorry. This will automatically get carried over to our next agenda. Nara.
Okay.
Additionally, the task force may want to consider doing it kind of in thematic chunks. I know that we've got those new updates from the state. And so if the task force wants to prioritize that first, we could do that as well. But it's going to be up to you guys. And we promise it won't be as overwhelming as it kind of just looked when Andrew just gave you that real quick run through. So thank you for not running off screaming into the hills. It'll be easier when we finally dive in there. All I got. Anything else for the good of the order?
We might want to consider also by license type, as instead of, because some of the state regulatory changes are kind of all over the place and they are ongoing. And there's a 30 new cannabis bills that just got introduced this year. So at the state level, so that it's so constantly in flux that it might be good for that to be something that gets sort of left, it's like, well, and when the state changes, we will.
So that brings me to
go along with that.
That brings me to an important point. I think that we should do, this zoning chart, but I think that we should do the zoning of every potential permit that is offered by the state at this time. With language that it is an evolution and permit types will be reviewed as they come up available. But I also think it's important that we take a step and clean up our definitions, twofold. Make our definitions aligned strictly with the state's definition, refer to the state's definition. That way when the state changes its definition, ours automatically changes. But also I think that it's a great educational step for everybody to understand what we're talking about when we talk about non-volatile manufacturing, what processing really means. I think having a good grasp of the terminology and what we're referencing might be a great place to start on this next chapter with, I would say, definitions and then go into zoning by permit type.
I would second that and just like to say that I understand the reasons that we've had, the priorities we've had up to this point as a task force, but I think there's a necessary component of general education, not that, the folks involved in this conversation are lacking in their general knowledge of the subject, but that if we're going to make crucial decisions about things like zoning and licensing and where all these activities will be allowed to go on, we need to sort of be properly educated on what all will be involved. So I just very much agree with that.
Definitions are always a good place to start.
Yep.
I like that. And
Okay.
Andrew's done a great job. Actually, I wanted to just shout out to him about how he's compiled these PowerPoints for us that really help to sort of illustrate different aspects. So actually that might work because
That would make my life easy. I can.
if we focused on definitions first, he could definitely pull some images to show what these things mean, so that we all can kind of get a visual understanding. That might help us going forward. What do y'all think?
Yeah.
And Jennifer and Nara, since I'm assuming you guys would have a lot of this handy, perhaps you could work with him to make sure he's got the right ones.
Oh yeah.
Cool. Andrew, was it
Yep.
okay that I volunteer you for that?
Absolutely. Sounds good to me.
And Sarah, I saw your hand up and down and up and down. Did you have something?
I was clapping. I love Andrew's presentations.
They are wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. It helps us all to move forward as a task force. Okay, is there anything else for today? I don't see my agenda. Where is the agenda? Oh, we're just at final public comments. We've been taking them throughout. We might have had everybody.
Had a final public comment slide in there, but I left
I
a
have a
couple from
comment.
last one.
Go ahead, Bart.
Thank you so much. In the minutes, it's been stated in the previous minutes that members of the public have commented, but their comments have not been actually written down. That seems unacceptable to me, and I'd like that changed. I'd like our comments included.
Thank you for your input, Bart. We lean more towards action minutes, so we do not note individual comments. Is there anything further? I don't see any other public input. So with that, we will go ahead and adjourn today. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.